Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 18 of the Beach Boys podcast, the long awaited reunion episode. Unfortunately, not under the best circumstances. When we heard of the passing of Brian Wilson about 2 weeks ago, we had decided it'd be only right for us to reunite for an episode and kind of just honor Brian's legacy and share some stories about him and basically just have a big Brian Wilson love fest. It's kind of the general idea. I'm Mike, and we got Nate back. So good to see you again. It's been way too long.
I know. I'm so thrilled to be talking about Brian and the boys with you again, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was looking back at our previous episode that we did, and I didn't realize how long it had been. It had been 3.5 years since our last episode. I was like, the time has just flown by. So it's great to be back. So we were thinking, there's a lot of different ways we can go about this, and I had been thinking about this a lot. I was like, how are we going to do this? Because normally, when we go into an episode, we usually have a general idea in mind, and we kind of work off of that. But with Brian passing away and wanting to honor his legacy and talk about him, it's probably going to be a little bit more open ended and I figured maybe just sharing stories about him and how we both initially got turned on to the Beach Boys, the experiences we've had, seeing them live in concert with or without Brian, just anything Beach Boys related. But you want to kick things off, Nate? Maybe kind of give us an overview of how you originally got into the Beach Boys.
Absolutely. So the way I got into the Beach Boys was probably not too different than the way I'm sure so many people around the world were introduced to the Beach Boys. And that was in the back seat of my grandparents' car when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Surfing USA came on the radio, and as soon as Carl's opening guitar riff hit, my ears were glued to the speakers, and I just felt this electricity shoot through my body. And I had never had a musical experience like that. I was so young. I don't think I ever paid very much attention to music up until that point. But here comes Surfing USA on the radio, and I just feel this jolt of joy. And I say to my grandparents, turn this up, turn it up, turn it up. And they go, oh, Nate, you wouldn't be interested in this. This is from our era. And I go, no, turn it up, turn it up. And they go, okay, this is the Beach Boys. And they turn it up and I listened to the whole song and I was totally, hypnotized and thrilled. And I gotta be honest with you, I was so little that I loved that song, but uh music wasn't, when I was that little, I was more worried about the sandbox and playing with my friends. But really, my deep dive into the Beach Boys came later on when I was, totally obsessed with the Beatles and learning everything about the Beatles that I could. And learning about their Sergeant Pepper era, I learned about how influenced they were by Brian and the Beach Boys. And so, given my respect for the Beatles, I thought, man, I should really dive into these Beach Boys. And, magically around the same time, uh, one day I'm watching TV and an advertisement for the Beach Boys coming to town comes on the TV. And my mom starts telling me about how much she loved the Beach Boys growing up. And she suggested that I listen to this album called Endless Summer, which was one of her all-time favorite albums. I listened to Endless Summer
Hmm.
and yeah, and that changed my life. And from there I dove into the rabbit hole and I never came back up.
Yeah.
And so Brian's music totally changed my life um in so many ways, but I can get to that later. Mike, you can
And
tell
just
us
real
now
quick,
about your yeah.
and how old were you when you started to really dive into them?
Oh, yeah, my bad. L late, junior high, like probably around
Young.
yeah, maybe 12, 13 years old.
And you said you first heard Surfing USA when you were like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there
So
was
you,
a
I mean,
good chunk
yeah,
amount of time in between those two kind of catalyst moments.
that's still very young though. I mean, getting into them in junior high, that's way younger than I was. I wish I had gotten into them that early. Uh, I had some similar experiences to you. I definitely remember being a kid and hearing Surfing USA a lot. And also Kokomo. I would say those are the two songs that I had been familiar with just from hearing them on the radio as a kid, especially Kokomo. Like I was born in 1990, so I remember in the early 90s that song was all over the place when I was a kid. And I really liked it as a kid too. I thought it was a great song, and I thought Surfing USA was a lot of fun too. But beyond that, I never explored anything deeper. And it wasn't until I want to say 2015. I had graduated from music school for a couple of years. I was a jazz guitar major. So jazz was always kind of my main thing that I focused on, but I was always into rock music, and I was always attracted to rock musicians who were a little bit outside of the box, might use some more jazz harmonies and stuff like that. And good friend of mine that I went to college with, he went to New York City to take a bass lesson with this like world renowned jazz bass player. And I forget, it was either this guy named Matt Penman or Alan Hampton, I want to say. I could be wrong. It was one of the two. But basically, my friend went to the city to take a lesson from this guy, and they started talking about slash chords. And he had said to my friend, he's like, if you want to explore slash chords on a deeper level, check out the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds. And just the fact that this like really well respected jazz bass player, recommended that album, I was like, all right, I'm definitely going to check that out. And there were a couple songs that I definitely knew, like "Wouldn't It Be Nice," and "God Only Knows." But then, I put the album on, I listened to it, and I was like, wow, this is definitely something way different than like a typical, pop rock band of the '60s, on so many different fronts. The melodies are very, it's very pretty, but also, very colorful, and a lot of stuff can be viewed as a little bit more outside of the box. The chord progressions are very wild. Obviously the slash chords, but the key changes, the use of colorful chords, seventh chords, ninth chords, some altered dominant chords here and there. Like all of the recipes that go into jazz harmony was very present there. The instrumentations were incredible, especially on Pet Sounds. I mean, he was just going insane with all of the different, combinations of instruments and really exploring the full depths, I think, of different musical timbres that can be achieved. And obviously the vocal harmonies, which I think is one of the hallmarks of the Beach Boys sound, and very few bands I think even come close to having vocal harmonies that are as sophisticated as the Beach Boys. So for me, that was my gateway. Like I said, I knew a couple of songs from when I was a kid, but then after hearing Pet Sounds, that was how I really started to dive in and explore their discography. And I didn't actually go in order. I think at that point, I started with Pet Sounds, and then I think the next album that I listened to, believe it or not, was actually Friends, which is one of my favorite albums of theirs. I love that record so much. And then I think I got into like 2020 and then Shut Down Volume 2, and I kind of randomly went through the discography, but at a certain point I listened to all of their records. And for me, it was music where the more and more I listened to it, the greater my appreciation grew for it. Especially a record like Pet Sounds. I mean, that's an album I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of times, but to this day, I can still put it on and I can find new things that I didn't notice before. There's so much depth to those songs, um, and beyond Pet Sounds too. I know it's cliche to talk about how great Pet Sounds is, but I think it's for good reason why people do it. But obviously beyond that too, I mean, the Beach Boys Today is incredible. Summer Days and Summer Nights, all of that kind of mid '60s Beach Boys period, I think was like a creative explosion on Brian Wilson's part. So that was how I had gotten into them, and in hindsight, I'm really glad that I had gotten into them at that point because I feel like it was a really good period to be a fan. It was like a year after the Love and Mercy movie had come out, and I feel like the Beach Boys were just in general being talked about a lot. And Brian had
Hmm.
been touring, and luckily I got to see him a couple times, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this video. But that was my initial gateway into them, and I think the biggest lesson that I took from that whole experience was never judge it. If you only know a couple of songs by a band, never let that be how you view them, because the problem was like, and you hear this so often, I just thought it was all surf music because all I knew was like Kokomo and Surfing USA. I was like, oh yeah, and also their name is the Beach Boys, so of course with a name like that you're going to think of surfing. But I remember hearing Pet Sounds and I was like, wait, this is that band that did like those surf rock songs? Like this is so far out. And it was a valuable lesson for me just to never judge any band based on a couple of songs. Like always, look a little bit deeper and see what you find. And I think the Beach Boys are one of the best examples of that because to this day, I'll turn people on to the Beach Boys, and I'm sure you've done the same thing. You have to go through this whole conversation about how it's not surf music, and it's much more sophisticated than that. But yeah, so around like 2015 was when I really seriously started getting into them, and the rest is history. Now we have a podcast about them. So, yeah.
Yeah, this music, it for people that take the dive into listening to this band and really learning about their story, I feel like this is going to sound so corny, but it's the truth. I feel like it all becomes a part of you, And there's so few diehard Beach Boys fans I know where their life hasn't been, completely impacted by
Hmm.
being a fan. And whether
Yeah.
that's, if you're a musician, your sense of harmony and production possibility, is so enriched. Or even if you're just a non-musician, just someone going through life, their music is the soundtrack to every stage in life from, school as a kid and
Yeah.
summers, and then into adulthood with things like Pet Sounds and songs about vulnerability. So, their music just seeps into your heart and stays there forever.
And that subject of vulnerability, I think that was something that really appealed to me about Brian's songwriting too, is he's not afraid to be vulnerable and really put everything out there. And you can really empathize with him on a lot of different fronts. Even something as simple as a song like In My Room. Like I'm a very introverted person, and I remember reading those lyrics and I was like, "Oh, I am like right there with Brian. I completely get, where he's coming from. Like, there's a world where I can go. What's the opening lyrics? There's a world where I
Uh,
can go and
Tell
um
my secrets to
yeah,
in
in
my
my
room.
room. And just the whole thing is about, kind of finding that feeling of contentment, just when you're by yourself in your room, either playing your music or, doing whatever it is you do. But I find a lot of that in Brian's lyrics, just this vulnerability that he puts out there, kind of showing you who he is. And at the core of it, he's just such a loving person with such a big heart. And, he went through such a challenging life, which we'll obviously get into as well. But knowing that music was always kind of the thing that he found solace in definitely it's just really beautiful, and his ability to produce such beautiful music in spite of having such a difficult life, I think is a testament to just how great of a songwriter he is.
Yeah, and we can sit here all day and talk about the exact chord inversions on this song or what bass he used on this song. And God knows you and I can do that forever.
Right.
But the true story of Brian Wilson, aside from all the technical nitty-gritty stuff, is the story of someone that constantly overcame obstacles.
Yeah,
His
really.
life was filled with challenges and bumps in the road for his entire time here on Earth, but
Yeah.
he always made music that lifted people's spirits, and he always had that goal to do so.
Hmm.
And it's just a testament to his perseverance. And I think he joked and called himself Brian Willpower Wilson. That was like a nickname he gave himself, and it's so fitting, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a lot of his life was just this quest to find some sort of peace. And I forget who said it. It was one of the either Al Jardine or somebody that plays in his group. They were all doing their write ups for him after he passed away. And one thing that I thought was really touching was somebody had said at the very end of their post, they said something along the lines of like, I really hope you finally found the peace that you were so desperately searching for. And I thought that was
Yeah.
really beautiful because he needed it. I mean, like you said, it's a life of perseverance. And I think another layer to the Beach Boys that made me even more intrigued when I started diving into them was really how crazy of a life Brian Wilson had. It's one of those lives where if you tell people, it almost doesn't even sound like it could be real. Like all the stuff with Eugene Landy, the fact that something like that could actually happen to a person is terrifying, And like you said, to be able to persevere through that, to get out on the other side and find, you know, new chapters in life and build upon them and build a life with, a new woman and make it all the way to 82. I mean, I'm honestly it's terrible that he's gone, but I am honestly shocked that he made it as long as he did, with the amount of health issues that he had and the different substances over the years. I feel like there had to be a lot of damage done, both physically and mentally, by the later part of his life. And the fact that he made it to 82 and he was still touring up until was the last
2022.
year yeah, was it 2022 was the last year?
Yep.
Um, and the fact that he outlived both of his brothers by, decades. Because Dennis died in, was it the late 70s or early 80s?
Dennis, you said?
Yeah,
Dennis died in
Dennis.
83, Carl died in 98.
Yeah. Um, so it really is a testament to that perseverance that you're talking about and really can be inspiring for anybody who's going through something. Um,
To me, Brian really represents and personifies the American dream. And the American dream and achieving success is never pretty. There's always challenges behind the scenes for everyone. But Brian went through those challenges in front of, millions of
yeah,
people in front of the globe
yeah,
under a microscope. But nonetheless, he represented the American dream because he came from humble beginnings and, a life where he had to share his room with his two brothers, all living in one bedroom. And within a few years, due to his and his cousin Mike's amazing songs, they're all living in mansions. It's
yeah,
incredible. And even beside any monetary gain, it just was a life of he lived it to its full potential. Life is for
yeah.
the living, one might say.
Yeah. What was that? That has to do with the Beach Boys, right? That life is
That's
for the
adult.
living.
Yeah, it's a track from Adult Child, which
Oh,
was
right,
one
right,
of
right.
their
I remember that.
unreleased. Yeah,
I remember, yeah, years ago on one of these podcast episodes, you brought that song up. I was like, wait, I've heard that somewhere. Um, yeah, and there's so many instances throughout his career where you see him overcoming different obstacles. Obviously, the mental health thing, that's always a lifelong battle when you're dealing with something like that. But there were definitely specific instances where there was a very clear hurdle and he overcame it. And I think a great example of that is when he finally performed the Smile album live in the 2000s. And you've seen the documentary about like
of
leading up
course,
to that
many
concert.
times.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's, I mean, and just seeing like how triggering it was for him to go back and revisit some of those songs, and then you see the end when they have the final concert. And for me, it was like one of those things where I'm like watching it and I'm like so nervous for him, even though I know he's going to do it and it's going to be fine. But even just like watching it and just thinking about all of those emotions that he must be feeling in that moment and how nervous he had to be. And then you see him do it and overcome it. And I feel like there are so many examples of that throughout his life. And like you said, a testament to the American dream, the idea of being in a certain place, but continuing to, get yourself out of there and work hard and do what you need to do. And I think, his story is obviously an inspiration for all of us.
and what a life lived. How many people could say in one lifetime they crossed paths with Charles Manson, Ronald Reagan, and Paul McCartney? Like
Yeah,
such
right,
a vast array of people were touched by Brian's music or came into his life.
right.
Crazy figures like Eugene Landy, people that did harm, but also people that lifted Brian up and helped him achieve great things.
Hmm.
People like Melinda, who you mentioned, Darian, yeah, of course, Mike, Al, Carl Dennis, Bruce, just his life was enriched by the people around him.
Hmm. And he greatly enriched all of those people's lives too. Obviously, I mean,
Of course. Oh, yeah, yeah.
the outpouring of love when he passed away was a beautiful thing to see. Just all over social media. I mean, nobody had anything but good things to say about him and the praise for his music. And it's a testament to how many lives he really touched. And we can, we're definitely examples of that. I mean, look at how much, joy we get out of just getting together and just discussing his music and talking about the chord movements or talking about the melodies and the harmonies. I mean, there's just so much stuff to sink your teeth into with his music. And I don't find that a lot of other pop groups of that time have the same amount of substance to the material that Brian does. I just feel like there's so much more depth to a lot of his stuff. Of course, there are other great bands from the '60s. I'm not like knocking any of the others, but there is a reason why the Beach Boys are one of my favorite bands. And same thing with you. I think there's something very unique to their sound, and a lot of that obviously has to do with the magic of Brian Wilson and his songwriting.
It's just the perfect pairing of Brian's adventurous music, Brian and his bandmates, adventurous experimental music that, could rock or could move you and make you cry. And then you
Hmm.
pair it with Mike and some of those other lyricists, beautiful depictions of California and America. And it's just the most timeless recipe. And it's
Yeah.
just an endless treasure trove of musical wealth. You can dive
Yeah.
into all their released albums, which there's plenty of those, all the compilations and live albums. Then you can go into the bootlegs, which God knows there's a gazillion of those, documentaries, books. There's multiple bands on the road at any given time playing their music.
Hmm.
It's just incredible. And it all started with Brian sitting at his piano, dissecting those four freshman parts.
Yeah.
Carl and David are somewhere else in the house learning their guitar.
Right.
Dennis is out surfing, and it just all comes together in the most beautiful way.
And that stuff about, transcribing the four freshman vocal harmonies on the piano and figuring out how to apply them to the Beach Boys music, to me, that is like a perfect example of something that Brian did that was certainly out of the ordinary for a typical pop musician to do. But because he spent all the time doing that and investigating it and figuring out how to implement it into his own music, it just added this whole additional layer of depth to the Beach Boys sound that I don't think any other band of the '60s could, keep up with in terms of the vocal harmonies and stuff like that. Like the Beatles, great band, another one of my favorite bands. The Beatles do not have vocal harmonies like the Beach Boys do. Like I can't think of any other '60s band, with the exception of obviously like a barbershop quartet or something, where it's solely based off of those vocal harmonies. But they have so many songs where you could just go on YouTube and just type in a Beach Boys song and put a cappella, and the amount of stuff that's going on just in the vocals alone can be a song in itself. Like I think a great example of that is I Get Around. I always knew there was a lot of stuff going on in the vocals, but when I listened to it a cappella, I could not believe how much stuff was happening, just between the different parts. And you have the and they're not doing the same things. There's like these counterparts, and it's just unbelievable stuff.
So sophisticated, things that you rarely hear in pop music. And even if you do, there's a lot of, fusion artists out there or people that dabble in things like extended voicings and different time signatures. But to me, it's so easy for that stuff to sound jarring or alienating. But Brian did it so seamlessly and it sounded so effortless, where you can be hearing some of the most complex music you've ever heard, but it makes you feel like you're going to the beach, like it's
Hmm.
just a beautiful, he could translate his feelings into those different chords and harmonies and instrumentation he so well.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many examples of that all throughout their music, and it's such a hard balance to find the idea of having stuff that's musically sophisticated, but like you said, also doesn't come off as alienating or pretentious, might be another word, where it seems like you're purposely trying to do stuff to be complicated. It's very hard to find that balance where it feels natural, but is also sophisticated. And there are just so many moments of that throughout all of the Beach Boys catalog. Like a great example, like just the way he just slips little things in, like on Don't Worry Baby, do da 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 da, and then he just modulates up a whole step to go to the F sharp for the chorus. Like it goes by so quickly, and if you don't really no theory and you're not listening for it, you probably have no idea. But he just like very casually just, moved up a whole step. Or like in Friends, like the opening chords of Friends, when he's going D to G and
And
then
it bounces
just
up.
goes up a half step and just changes keys. And it's like, whoa, that was. But like I live for stuff like that. Like those are always my favorite moments in music where something unexpected happens because I listen, and anybody that follows my YouTube channel knows this about me by now. I definitely listen to music with musicians' ears. Like I don't really pay much attention to lyrics. That's something I need to be better about, and I'm trying to be more mindful of that. But I very much am listening to the chord progressions and the melodies and the way they work off of each other and the instrumentations. And with the Beach Boys, there are just so many moments where I'm like, oh my God, what was that? That was really cool. And for people like you and me who have really curious minds, it's just an endless amount of material for you to explore and dive into and try to figure out what he was doing. And a lot of times you're never going to come up with a straight answer. And to me, that's part of the fun. I mean, to this day, people still debate over what key God only knows is in. Is it an A or is it an E? I think it's an E, but I know some people think it's an A. But to me, that's like part of the fun. It's like, I don't really want there to be an answer to that. I want it to be a forever mystery because that's
Well,
what keeps us.
that segues really well into something I wanted to bring up as a point of discussion because we sort of have a unique opportunity with this episode, in that we're both professional musicians, blessed to be playing music,
Very
and
blessed.
we should. I'm really curious to hear how you feel. You can even get specific how Brian impacted your musicianship or what things he made you think about or want to dive into more. And I'll say the same.
Yeah. Um, that's a great question, and we can go in a lot of different areas with that. That's a very broad question for me to answer. So for me, like I said, I when I started getting into the Beach Boys, I was coming from more of a jazz musician sort of perspective. So there's definitely a lot of things that I picked up from Beach Boys music that I learned how to incorporate in more of a jazz context. And it could be a variety of different things. So it could be something as simple as like an interesting chord movement to get from one chord to the next. And I see how Brian does it. And maybe that chord movement might pop up in a jazz standard and I could use that little idea. Or some of the vocal harmonies, I definitely transcribed a lot of the 4-part harmonies, like I transcribed "Our Prayer" and "Your Dream Comes True." Um, couple, they only have a couple of songs actually like that. Now that I'm thinking about it, right? Are those like the two main ones? Can you think of any others that are just a cappella, like harmony songs, other than those two?
The Lord's Prayer, which they did in '63,
And
their
then
arrangement of that.
a young man is gone. Also, I
Yeah,
forgot,
and
which is really "And their hearts were full of spring," but they changed the words, I believe.
right, right. And I think, but yes,
Yeah, but you
I know
get
what you're
the
saying.
so like you learn some of those vocal harmonies, and for me, I'm always trying to take sounds that I like and see how they can translate over to the guitar, because obviously, I'm a guitar player, and when I'm listening to the Beach Boys, I'm not really like picking up like any new guitar parts most of the time. Like usually most of the meat of what I'm listening for is in the vocals or in the chord progressions, which a lot of times is more so on piano than guitar. But picking up on some of the different vocal stuff and figuring out how to translate those voicings onto the guitar. Um, and also just some of the devices that he uses to change keys and songs and just seeing how he does it and figuring out ways how to implement it into your own stuff and just other like they're just like I said, they're just like a lot of songs that have these little interesting musical moments where just from an analysis standpoint, just seeing what he's doing, for example, forever she'll be my surfer girl off of that lucky old son, that you know that little piano thing that happens in between the chorus and the verse where it's like da 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 da, da. Like it's contrary motion. You have the upper piano part going up in half step. I think it's half steps. I could be wrong. And then the lower part is going down in half steps. But just like seeing something like that being, and then like you play it on piano or play it on guitar and be like, oh, I see like what he was doing there. Just getting a little glimpse into the mind of Brian Wilson, be like, wow, I can't believe he like came up with this, you know.
Absolutely. I really love your tidbit about being a guitarist, but listening and learning from mainly the vocals. That's
Hmm.
so fascinating to me. But it makes sense with the Beach Boys because their vocals are so rich. What I'd say I picked up, well, I'll be frank. Before the Beach Boys, I liked the Police, the Beatles, excuse me, uh, Nirvana, groups like that. But I was knew about six chords on guitar, and I had a little band, and I was passionate about singing and our little garage band. But getting into the Beach Boys was really the catalyst to make me interested in production at a deep level and arranging and
Yeah.
harmony, both vocal harmony and harmony as in, chords. And I was just, fixated on learning everything I could about their music. And therefore, so much of what they did creatively was sort of instilled into me. But likewise, with the chord progressions, I was so intent on learning all of these chords and trying to understand Brian's compositional genius and hopefully replicate it myself that
Hmm.
I'd be sitting there at school, probably skipping some class and sitting in a practice room, staring at the chords and going, "What the hell is a major seven?" And finding some other kid in the band area and being like, "Hey, what's a mid?" And slowly but surely, I'd learn, okay, this is this is a slash chord. This is for our musicians out
Right.
there. When I was trying to learn these songs without any real musical knowledge, I thought a slash chord was you can play this chord or this one and not the inversion.
Yeah. It's two options.
But I would just sit there and I would listen to a few seconds of the Beach Boys and I would try to play along on my piano or guitar. And through that, through the trial and error, through asking people, obviously thanks to the internet, that was a big help, clearly. I learned all these chords. And then once I understood how to play them, it hit me quite how musically daring and adventurous
Mhm.
his progressions truly are. Aside from the way they make you feel, theory
Right.
wise, they're also just so beyond what nearly all of his
Right.
contemporaries and even people today are
Right.
doing. And like we alluded to earlier, there's other people that do complicated chords, but he does it just so seamlessly. So I was really influenced by his harmony and his chord progressions, like you mentioned. Another area of huge influence was the area of creative arranging and really just having no rules to arrangement. In my opinion, Brian threw out the rule book when it came to arranging. There are some songs where, the drums play very unorthodox style drum beats, and there are plenty of songs that have two or three unique bass lines. I mean, that's practically unheard of. And
Yeah.
Brian made it sound gorgeous and perfect, and you'd never
Hmm.
question it. And so Brian taught me all about doubling instruments and tripling instruments and using echo and finding unique combinations of instruments and man, time signatures and having unique rhythms. And so I could really go on and about the specific musical ways
Hmm.
that he impacted me.
The whole thing about throwing out the I almost said the real book. That's my jazz coming
Yeah.
out. The whole thing about throwing out the rule book um, is definitely part of the mystique, I think, of the Brian Wilson sound, and I really appreciate that about him because I'm pretty sure he was a self-taught musician, right?
To some degree, absolutely, but with two musical parents that were
Right.
modest songwriters themselves,
Right.
I'm led to believe that a lot of his musical education did come from his folks,
Yeah.
as well as the Loves were extremely musical back then and still today. And so
Right.
I'm sure Brian learned a lot at their house too, because Brian had a little upright piano and an organ at his house, which was a modest home in Hawthorne. But then
Hmm.
he'd get to go to his cousin Mike's house, and they had a harp and a grand piano.
Hmm.
And so I think Brian was also able to do a lot of musical development there as well.
Didn't you say you've driven past that house in Hawthorne? Did or am
You
I
know,
th
I never have. I never have.
oh, I don't know. I thought, I'm thinking of somebody else. Um, but the whole thing about so yeah, he had a lot of music in the family, and of course that contributed to his upbringing and his teaching. But he never like went to college for music or anything like that.
Right, right.
Like I find like his arranging and stuff like that when he's just doing it based on his own rules. To me, that's where some of the most interesting stuff happens, because I went to school for jazz, and you take a course called jazz arranging, and they show you how to arrange different parts, and there's definitely set rules that they want you to stick with, which is the same with any sort of
Art form.
theory. Yeah, like, but even like if you take music theory in college, if you take classical theory, they teach you like stuff like figured bass with like Bach parts, and there's these set rules that you're supposed to follow. But at a certain point in classical music, people started breaking those rules and doing their own things, and that period of classical music, that's my favorite part of classical music. So same thing
What would they
with,
call that era?
well, for me, that's impressionist, which is like the late 1800s, early 1900s, really came out of France. Um, and it's funny because one of my favorite composers is Ravel, and he wrote this piece. He went to the Paris Conservatory, and at that time, there were all these rules that you had to follow. And he wrote this piece for one of his classes, and it's this beautiful piano piece, and then the song ends on a major seven chord, which was breaking the one of the rules at the time. So just because he ended on that chord, they marked the whole thing wrong. But these guys that kind of came along and just said, forget the rule book, I'm going to do my own thing, those always tend to be the people that I resonate with the most. And it makes so much sense that Brian would be in a similar camp. And I find that a lot of times, if you're not following the rule book and you're going off of your own ears and your own intuition, you're going to come up with stuff that I think just has more magical qualities to it. And like I said, there's just certain elements to the Beach Boys sound and their music that it's hard to fully explain it and be like, all right, here's what's happening right here. Here's why it sounds good. Like there's just so many moments where these things just sound incredible, but it's hard to like codify, all right, here's exactly what's happening right here and here's why it sounds great. And I love that element of mystique that is present in the Beach Boys music. And I think a lot of that is to your point of what you said about just throwing out the rule book and just doing what Brian sees fit for the music, using his ears and his intuition.
And I want to even expand and clarify on that take of mine. When I say he threw out the real rule book, I'm not even implying.
You almost said real book there too.
Yeah, I know, I know. The musician is showing.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not even implying that his songwriting lacked intention. I think it's quite the opposite. I love a lot of the 60s bands, but when I listen to groups like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, I hear chord progressions that to my ears sound like, let's start on this chord. Okay, hey, I know this chord. Let's go to this chord.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
someone else says, oh, have you ever seen this chord? And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And there's no real
Yeah,
rhyme or
yeah.
reason to it. And of
Right.
course, I mean, gosh, Lennon and McCartney, greatest songwriters ever, arguably. So I'm not knocking them, I'm just making a comparison. When
Hmm.
I hear something like Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite or A Day in the Life, those chord progressions are neat and fabulous, but they sound rather like throwing something at the wall. Versus with Brian's chord progressions, they sound so intentional and
Right.
there's no accidents. Every single note that you're hearing in the arrangement, from the lowest bass note sung by Mike Love or played on a bass guitar, all the way up to the highest falsetto and guitar solo, every note is contributing to this sound and nothing's by mistake.
Right.
And it gives you so much to listen to. You know, there's a lot
Right.
of music where your ear knows where it's going. But with Brian's music, there's just so much happening that, like you mentioned earlier, you can listen to his music as many times as you like, and you'll always hear new parts or new production techniques. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
And I find with a lot of those songs, because I did so many covers of them for my YouTube channel years ago, I had to listen to them on a deeper level because I would do these guitar arrangements where I would try to get as much of the music as possible on two guitar parts. So a part of that requires listening to the song, being like, all right, I have the chords in one. I could try to get the bass note as well. I have a melody. There are some background parts. There are some vocal harmonies here. There's a little instrumental part over here with some different instrument, and just from dissecting it and listening to it on that level, I did find that my appreciation grew even deeper for a lot of the songs. Like there were a couple of Beach Boys songs that I never could get into, but then after doing some cover videos of them, I enjoyed them a lot more. One example is Sloop John B. I used to struggle with that song. I used to think that if it wasn't for that song, Pet Sounds would be a perfect album all the way through. But then when I learned the guitar part and I kind of saw the way it all worked together, I was like, oh, this is actually like a really cool song. Um, and that's happened with a lot of different tracks of theirs for me.
Your your guitar videos of playing the Beach Boys, those arrangements are so lush, and you really did a great job of capturing the brilliance of Brian and Mike and the guys' songwriting and synthesizing it into guitar arrangements. And through listening to those, I learned so much about Brian's writing and songwriting in general. So kudos to you for those,
Oh, I
man.
really appreciate that.
Those are timeless. And to
Well,
this day, when I'm talking to people in the Beach Boys fandom, let's call it, fans at shows. I've had people even at shows mention to me, "Hey, you're that guy who was on the podcast with Mike, and his guitar videos are so great, and you got to tell him his guitar."
wait,
So,
people at shows recognize you because of this?
well, this thing and some other recent events, it's
Right, right,
happened
right.
before.
That's so
But you know,
cool.
we're also like there tends to be like a certain tight-knit element to Beach Boys fans too. So I'm not trying to sit here and act like a celebrity or anything. I was
No,
just
it's
bringing
cool.
it up
I get
to
it.
mention to you that people several times have mentioned to me that they loved your guitar videos of dissecting Brian's arrangements into those was it 2 or 3 part guitar, or I guess it depended on the
Usually,
song, right?
usually two. Once in a while, I have to do three because it's just I can't get all the parts on one. But I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I mean, it's a lot coming from you, and that's initially how we even first got connected. Was I think
Yeah. Yeah,
did you
you're
was it
right.
on Facebook? Did you see? Because I would post them on Beach Boys Facebook groups. I think that's where you originally found some of my guitar videos, right?
Yeah, I don't remember. I can't for certain say if it was through Facebook or YouTube, but yeah, that was a long time ago, and I was so moved even back then for the first time hearing them all the way
I
to
appreciate
today.
that.
Yeah.
Well, I remember very vividly the first time we ever talked because we connected online because of my videos, and then you remember when we had our first phone call?
Yeah, it was very early during the pandemic where
Right,
we were all in our rooms,
right, right.
and I vividly remember it as well because it was truly like kind of a ray of sunshine in like a
Yeah,
really dark time
yeah,
to meet someone who shared such a similar passion for Brian's music. And you know, there's a lot of people that love Barbara Ann and Rhonda and 409s and all that
right.
stuff is great. And I can talk about the summer and the beach stuff all day. But to meet someone that was interested in the chords and the production and the harmonies on a deep level, and we shared that was just so special. And it, obviously
Mhm.
uh snowballed into something really special that I'm glad
Yeah,
we still get to do to this day.
yeah. Me too. It's crazy that it's been 5 years already.
Gosh.
Thinking back to like the beginning of COVID when we were doing that, and it really was
Yeah.
like it was a great little thing during a darker time, and the feeling is mutual. I learned so much from you, and you are just an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to stuff like this. And there's tons of, tracks and albums and unreleased things that you're aware of that I'm still not completely completely well versed in. So it's been, definitely goes both ways. I've learned a ton from you, and I will say one thing that I've loved through doing my YouTube channel all of these years is, anybody that looks at my channel, I cover a lot of different stuff all over the musical spectrum. So because of that, I kind of get a feel for a lot of different musicians and what their communities are like. And of every community, like the Beach Boys have by far like the nicest, most loving, just good vibe people that I've
Yeah,
ever met. And the couple times I've seen them in concert, everybody there is just so nice, and it's just such a loving, supporting environment. And you can really tell that everybody genuinely loves Brian, and regardless of how he sounds when you see him live, you're just so happy to be in the same room as him, and the fact that he was still with us for as long as he was, and we were able to be in his presence. I mean, that's something really special. And I think Beach Boys fans have, I think they're really special types of people.
I couldn't agree more. Whether it's people that I meet from that universe in a professional setting, or whether it's fans that I meet at shows or online or through these podcasts, I'm just amazed by, like you said, the special types of people that are attracted to the Beach Boys music and journey. And I think it attracts people that have big hearts and aren't afraid to wear them on their sleeves.
Yeah.
And God knows it attracts a few crazies here and there, but that's any
Everything does.
fandom.
Yeah.
Yeah. But by and large, I just I feel so blessed for the amount of wonderful people that have come into my life through being a Beach Boys fan or through getting the opportunity to work with people in that world. So
Yeah.
you're just so right about that.
Yeah. And maybe that could be a good segue into when we've seen them live, either Brian or the Beach Boys, and maybe some stories we have about that. Um, I've never seen the Beach Boys. I know you see the Beach Boys every year with your dad, right? Isn't that like a tradition?
Mhm.
So I've never seen Mike, but I've seen Brian three times. Um, and again, I feel like when I got into them, it was like the perfect time because the Love and Mercy movie had come out the year prior. I started really diving into their music, and then I found the three times I saw him. I found the set lists, but the first time I saw him was on May 17th, 2016. And this was when he was doing the Pet Sounds 50th anniversary world tour. Um, and this was in Boston. It was so they did the Pet Sounds album with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And this was like in my early days when I was really getting obsessed with the Beach Boys. So the tickets were on the pricier side. It's funny, all concert tickets are so expensive now that in hindsight it probably doesn't seem that bad, but the tickets were around like $250 or something like that. So I didn't have any friends at that time that liked the Beach Boys enough to justify spending that much on a ticket. So I went by myself and I drove up to Boston, and it was one of the most incredible experiences. The first time I saw him was by far the best in terms of his actual performance and just the set list. Everything about it was great. And having the orchestra, with him playing Pet Sounds. Um, and I met a couple of really cool people there. Like you said, you meet some of these people at these shows, and they're just so nice. Like I was sitting by myself, and there were these two guys, probably around my age, sitting in the row behind me, and I just overheard them, nerding out, talking about Brian. And then next thing you know, we get into this conversation. Super nice guys, and I was surprised too at the demographics of a lot of these Brian Wilson concerts. There's a lot of young people. It's like this interesting mixture of like a lot of young people and then some older people, some people maybe like, people in their 50s and 60s, but it really did seem like it covered a wide spectrum of a lot of different types of people.
They have
Um,
this expression 8 to 80s of that's the
is that what they say?
audience. Yeah.
That's so funny. It makes sense. I mean, that's exactly what it looked like. Really quick, if you don't mind, I actually have the set list up for the first time I saw Brian. I just want to read this off because it was such a great set. So the entire second set is just the Pet Sounds album in order, so I don't need to go over that. But set one It's 19 songs. So he opened. So keep in mind, this is my first time ever seeing the Beach Boys or seeing Brian Wilson. I have no idea what to expect. I'm like all excited. They get out there. The first thing they do is Our Prayer. So right off the bat, I'm just like in heaven. I'm like, oh my God. And then they end Our Prayer, and then they go right into Heroes and Villains, which was incredible. Brian was sounding great. His vocal performance on this particular concert was really strong. So Our Prayer, Heroes and Villains, California Girls, Dance Dance Dance, I Get Around, Little Honda, Shut Down, Little Deuce Coupe, In My Room, Surfer Girl, Don't Worry Baby, Wake the World, Add Some Music to Your Day. Then I Kissed Her. This next one, One Kind of Love. I hadn't heard that song prior to this concert. The only song I knew from that album was The Right Time because that was like the big hit. But I
The
remember
big, yeah,
that song really hit me. I was like, what is this song? Like the chorus in particular, I love that chord that he ends on in the chorus. Don't you know it's unconditional? That like sharp 11, that dominant sharp 11 chord. And I was like, wow, this song is wild. So then I got into that, and to this day, that is one of my favorite. It might be my number one favorite Brian Wilson solo song. Both musically and lyrically, we could talk about that in a second. But just a little aside, that was one of the highlights of the first set for me. And then the remainder of the set was "Do It Again," "Wild Honey," "Funky Pretty," and then they closed with "Sail on Sailor" because Blondie Chaplin was in the group. Um, and it was just such an incredible set. And like I said, his vocals sounded amazing. And then you get this nice selection of all classic Beach Boys hits, and then they just hit you with the entirety of Pet Sounds for set two, and then he did a 7 song encore: Good Vibrations, All Summer Long, Help Me Rhonda, Barbara Ann, Surfing USA, Fun Fun Fun, and Love and Mercy, which is to me perfect closer for a
agreed.
concert. But and Brian was like in such a funny mood, like he was cracking a lot of jokes, and at one point it was funny. It was my first time hearing Matt Jardine, and um, I was just being an idiot because like they said Al Jardine's son, Matt Jardine. So I was like expecting like a 25-year-old guy to come out, and then I just didn't like put together like how old they are. So he announces Matt Jardine, and he said something along the lines of, "Now we're gonna bring out Matt Jardine, the most handsome boy in the room," or something like that. And then the first song that I remember Matt sang on was "Don't Worry, Baby," and you have the opening instrumental part, and everybody's just waiting in anticipation, be like, all right, is he going to sound like Brian doing that falsetto? And then he comes in with the opening lyrics, and it sounded so good. It sounded so good that after he did that opening, well, it's been building up inside of me for I don't know how long. The whole audience started clapping after that opening line because everyone's just like, yes, he sounds like Brian. Um, but that was the first time I saw him, and I could not have asked for a better experience. To this day, easily top three. I've been to a bunch of concerts. This would easily make my top three, both musically and just from just how meaningful of an experience it was being such a big Brian Wilson fan, getting to see him at that point in his career, and I'm so happy I did it in hindsight. So that was my first time ever seeing them. What's your experience?
So yeah, I have been seeing as many Beach Boy related shows as I could catch for really as long as I can remember at this point, since I was a teenager. And that includes the Beach Boys shows with Mike and Bruce, that included Brian's shows, Al Jardine's group, seeing Dean Torrance, anyone I could see from that whole orbit. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to see those people perform. But since we're talking about Brian here, I'll talk about the Brian shows that I was lucky enough to experience, and I'll compare them to the Beach Boys shows. I'll do that. So with Mike and Bruce's Beach Boys shows, they are a true party from the second those guys set foot on stage to the second they leave. It's hit after hit after hit, and there are beach balls being bounced through the crowd, and there are surfboards on stage, and there's video screens showing old hot rods from the 50s and 60s, and hamburger stands and the beach, and their
Mm-hmm.
shows really transport you back, and it's like a dance party. And that's awesome what Mike does. But what Brian did was something totally different and totally unique, but just as special. And how I always interpreted Brian's shows is I'm a huge Phil Spector fan, huge fan of Brian Wilson and Jan Berry, and all those guys recorded music with these larger than life ensembles with, three, four, five guitars, multiple keyboardists, multiple percussionists. And as a kid listening to these tunes with my headphones, I'd always wonder, man, what would it look like with all those musicians playing those songs at once, creating that wall of sound? What would it be like to be hearing that in person?
Hmm.
And Brian's solo band recreated that whole wall of sound effect in person, which people would have thought was impossible in the 60s. They did it. The entire Pet Sounds album live, Smile live, they translated the wall of sound to something that you could listen to in person.
Hmm.
And to me, it was like almost like having the privilege of being at a studio session with the best musicians in the business and hearing them play Pet Sounds or the Beach Boys hits and just having the privilege of hearing the most incredible musicians and with the
Hmm.
perfect level of musicianship and tightness. And so it just was the perfect complement to Mike and Bruce's band, which, the volume's cranked up to a level that's making your ears a ring. And
Hmm.
you've got drum solos and you've got Uncle Jesse, John Stamos up there hamming it up. And it's a great party. And then you've got Brian's shows, which were just a true musical treat.
Hmm. I
So it
feel
was a
like they
great
attract
dichotomy there.
I feel like they attract two different types of Beach Boys fans. I think if you're somebody who just wants to hear all of the classic hits and have more of that party vibe, it would make sense that, Mike and Bruce would give that to you. But I feel like if you want something a little bit deeper and something where, you might hear a couple of B-sides here and there, you might hear, more exotic instrumentations and stuff like that. I feel like that's where Brian kind of
The
shines.
the joke I always say is people always get hung up on the fact that the Beach Boys split into those different camps and they wish it could have been all of them together, which would have been great, don't get me wrong. But my joke is that them being separated is actually an example of what capitalism is supposed to look like. Because if you want to pay for a party with surfboards and beach balls and full house vibes, you can
Hmm.
pay for that and you can go to
Right.
that show. Or if you want to experience what it would be like to be at a Wall of Sound studio session with
Hmm.
Brian Wilson at the helm, you can experience that, or you could
Right.
experience that. And like you said, it catered to different people. And there was obviously a big crossover of people like me that were just as happy to be at either show.
Right.
But it was just a great, like, to me, it's almost like you look at Brian and Mike, and they were amazing partners for so long, but by their, elderly years, let's call it, they just had different MOs. Like I think Brian was all about the perfect arrangements and playing the deep cuts and, playing maybe 20 dates, 30 a year, nothing too rigorous. And then you got Mike playing 150, 180 shows a year, cranking out 30 hits a night. And they just both got to fulfill they, what their version of success was to them. And I think it's
Hmm.
really beautiful. And of course, they got to reunite in 2012. And not to change the subject too much, but I'd be remiss on the subject of Brian and Mike reuniting
Right.
that within the last few weeks, actually, Brian and Mike got to reunite one last time. And it's just so magical and special to me because when you hear Mike share his memories of the first time having an experience with his cousin Brian, it was hearing Brian sing on his grandmother's lap when they were toddlers. And a few
Wow.
weeks ago, in their 80s, Mike got to visit Brian one last time and they sang together. They sang Their Hearts Were Full of Spring and Fun, Fun,
Really?
Fun. Yeah, and a couple
Wow.
songs. And it was, of course, just a private little get together and just one last visit. And I think it's so beautiful that you look at that story and that journey of those two guys, Brian and Mike, were our John and Paul, and they
Yeah.
started singing together as toddlers. Before they could probably even talk, they were singing together. And now in their 80s, in Brian's last few months or weeks, they got to sing together one last time, which is
Yeah.
just so special. I know that doesn't relate specifically to
No,
the
that's great.
concert thing, but I
I
feel like
didn't,
I'd be
yeah.
remiss if we didn't mention that.
No, that's really important. I didn't know that they had met up a couple weeks prior to his passing too. That's really beautiful that they sung together one last time. And it's great too that they didn't leave things on bad terms as, when Brian passed, because you obviously hear that, Brian Wilson and Mike Love were at odds together and it seemed like there was tension there, but by the end, it seemed like they made amends to some degree, and they had didn't the whole band, well, Mike, Al, and Brian, didn't they reunite for like some awards show or something a couple
Yeah,
years ago as well?
they did a Grammy tribute to the Beach Boys where
Right.
they had, a couple dozen of the biggest artists right now all pay tribute to the Beach Boys with
Hmm.
them watching from the audience. And yeah, how special. Can you imagine hearing,
Yeah.
the who's who of music singing your songs that you wrote? It would be incredible.
Yeah. And it's just great. It's great that they were able to make amends because it's so common for that to happen in a lot of bands where there's bad blood between two of the main frontmen and they just never bury the hatchet. And you see so many examples like that. Pink Floyd, Roger Waters and David Gilmour, just like these titans that just are at such odds with one another. And it's great that Brian and Mike were able to put that behind them
Reconcile. Yeah.
to whatever degree they were able to. I don't know the specifics of it all. But even like when I first saw Brian in 2016, like it definitely seemed like there was some bad blood between him and Mike because he even would make like little comments in between one of the songs. He said something along the lines of, he's like, yeah, Mike is playing with the Beach Boys, but I'm playing with Brian Wilson. I don't understand how that works. Or he said something like that, just like a little comment where I'm like, all right, is there's still some tension there, I think. But that was almost 10 years ago now. So, a lot can change. And what's the point of holding on to all that at a certain point when you get to a certain age and, especially if you think you might be on the way out? I mean, is that did they suspect that Brian was on the way out? Is that why Mike had gotten together with him?
I couldn't necessarily comment on like the specifics, but I think the writing was on the wall for a few years now. I
Well,
don't think like
especially when his wife died. Once his wife died, I got really nervous. I was like, "Oh man, it's only a matter of time now," because that's so common, especially with somebody like him, where it seemed like his wife was his caretaker, and he needed somebody like that in his life.
yeah, exactly. So I guess it would be up to each person's individual interpretation of the situation to ever know if those were the feelings or not. But
Hmm.
they had to know deep down that there was a truly finite amount of time.
Yeah, for sure.
And
He was
it's
82, right?
incredible that yeah, and you still got Mike playing 150 plus shows a year, so it's a miracle that he got to make the time to visit Brian.
Yeah, I got to see Mike. I got to see Mike with the Beach Boys. That's still something
Yeah,
I
you
haven't
really
done.
should. It's the most, you know, especially with Brian no longer performing and no longer with us. It's the greatest possible tribute to his legacy. And that's not to say that David Marks and Al Jardine and Dean Torrance don't do great shows with the Surf City All-Stars and Al Jardine's Endless Summer Band. They do good stuff as well, but Mike and Bruce's show is just full of energy, full of love, no
Hmm.
pun intended. And yeah, they do a really good job. So if they're around you, you should definitely
Yeah, I gotta look.
see a show.
Do they? Is it all just hits, or do they do any deep cuts at all?
Oh yeah, well I have this one set list from a few years ago. And even on here you've got All I Want to Do and It's About
Oh, great.
Time. For a while they were covering Here Comes the Sun, but they're not doing that
Really?
anymore.
That's an interesting choice.
Yeah, yeah, but
Did they ever do, because I know you've seen him a bunch of times, did they ever do The Nearest Faraway Place? Because that was written by Bruce, right?
yeah, they never have done that since the late 60s.
That's a
That was the
beautiful
last
song.
time they did it. Yeah, it's
That's a
so
super
underrated.
underrated. That album I think is incredibly underrated. I love 2020. I know not everybody loves it, but I think there are some truly exceptional songs on there. Some of the most
It's kind of
underrated
like
Beach Boys songs in my opinion.
it's like a musical chocolate box where you get like one of each variety.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
got like the surf rock with Do It Again, and then you've got the country feel with Cotton Fields and the kind of
Right.
Baroque thing going on with Time to Get Alone.
I love that
So
one.
yeah,
And also
2020 is
kind
great.
of Baroque too, Baroque rock feel with I Went to Sleep, which is
Yeah,
one of my favorite Beach Boys deep cuts. And then obviously you get the Charles Manson Never Learn Not
yeah,
to Love. Is
creepy
that what it's
vibes
called?
with
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
You
And
said
then the
you've never
slice
you
of smile.
didn't you say you've never listened to that song? Never Learn Not to Love?
I I don't doubt that maybe I said that at the time. I definitely had listened to it and have listened to it. I probably just said that as a way to feign ignorance, or to
Yeah,
not
yeah.
like um but yeah, that's one song that I kind of laugh. People will ask me sometimes, people that watched our old show, if I still have those couple of songs that I said that I disliked. I think I said Lana and Hey Little Tomboy. And
And
even those,
10 Little Indians.
yeah, all three of those I can actually enjoy now. But Never Learn Not to Love is one that, yeah, the production is cool. The song is like harmonically not bad and all that, but the context is just so off-putting that I can't get myself
Yeah,
to.
I get it. I told you I had similar struggles with that first self-titled Brian Wilson album, just knowing what was happening behind the scenes with Eugene Landy. I could still listen to the album, but there's definitely an element of I almost feel kind of creeped out sometimes, like listening to it and just wondering what the circumstances were for Brian and what he was going through. But I could still
Yeah,
listen to it, but I could totally relate to that.
it's a magnificent album, some of the best songwriting I've ever heard, but there is a definite feeling of unease throughout that entire record. Like,
Hmm.
I think when I listen to it, it's gorgeous, but some of those songs make me tense up a little bit, like
Yeah.
you said, because you can just sort of feel a bit of tension through the music, especially once you know the story.
Well, I
But
think his voice, I think that period, the way his voice sounded in that period, it almost sounded like I mean, this is going to sound kind of dark, but it almost sounded like a cry for help. Like the timbre of his voice, it was like this
yeah,
high, almost just like he's just like screaming, like "Help me! Like get me out of here!" And
that's
I think it even gets amplified on "Sweet Insanity," which was unreleased. But like that rap song, you know the song I'm talking about on "Sweet
the
Insanity," where
Smart
he has him
Girls, yeah.
rap. Like I'm listening to that, I'm just like, what was going on in that studio? Like it's just really kind of weirds me out.
Well, you just really made me think of something. In the Beach Boys' earliest days, they were doing an impersonation of the Four Freshmen and Jane and Dean and the Four Seasons. So of course he has that falsetto thing going on and that very boyish charm kind of sound to his voice. And then you get to the 70s around 15 Big Ones and Love You, and he's purposely trying to show like, hey, I'm not that same guy I was back then. So I'm going to sing with a really raspy voice and put
Hmm.
on this like tough guy voice. And then, like you said, you get to the 80s and there is that drastic change again. And I had never thought about what you just said, but that's really insightful.
Yeah, I mean it's some intense stuff, and it definitely seemed like a very specific period of his discography where his voice took on that sound. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love that Lucky Old Son so much because I feel like on that album it sounds like he found an equilibrium, and it sounds like he's more at peace at that point in his life. Just on
You
like the
took the
tone of
words
his
right out of
voice.
my
Yeah.
mouth.
Hmm.
I was going to say exactly that with by the end with his solo career in the 2000s, his voice has a comfort and peace to it that
Hmm.
reflects like a life of finally finding that
Yeah.
bit of peace. Wow, it's so funny that our minds both went to that
That's why we
exactly.
get along. That's why we get along. I think also it just sounded like, especially towards the very end, like the last couple albums with no peer pressure, it sounded like he was starting to have a lot more fun. You know, like he did the tribute to Gershwin. He did the No Peer Pressure album where it's a lot of poppy songs with a lot of guest features. And it seems like he was enjoying the process of performing with these younger pop artists who obviously have a lot of respect and admiration for him, and kind of seeing him pass the torch to the younger generation. So I do think that also contributes to what we were saying about the perseverance. And I feel like there is an element of redemption to the story of Brian Wilson, where you kind of have this dark period through the 80s and 90s, and then you see him eventually come out on the other side of that. And I do feel like when I think about the, last decade, or, 15 years or whatever of his life, I do view that in a much more comfort. How do I phrase this? I view it in a more comforting way than I do like that middle period of like the 80s and 90s, where there was still great music being put out, but you just know that he was suffering so much. And that's not to say that he wasn't suffering, in the present, or in the recent years, because of course he still was. I don't. I think there was always an element of suffering that was
Right.
always going to be present in his life, no matter what. And he even said, I remember when I read his autobiography, I'm pretty sure he said in the book that he still hears voices like to the present day, but he just learned how to tune them out. Um, but where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought. Oh, just saying. Oh yeah, how just the later part of his discography, I do view in a much more comforting sort of way than I do that early part.
I agree. He sounds so at ease and so self-confident and relaxed when you listen to particularly that Lucky Old Son,
Yeah, incredible
the
album.
Walt Disney album that he did in the Key of Disney, and the Gershwin album, like you mentioned. Just yeah, he really learned how to use his new voice, so to speak, as like a beautiful instrument, just in the way that he used his, high-pitched voice back in the 60s.
Right. When he died, one of the first things I thought about was the lyrics, the opening lyrics to Southern California, where he says, "I have this dream, singing with my brothers in harmony,
Yeah,
supporting each other." And I almost teared up thinking about it. I was like, it's so beautiful. And I hope that's what he's doing now. Obviously none of us know what's on the other side of this, but I hope he's found that peace that he was looking for. And I hope he is reunited with Carl and Dennis, because that'd be incredible.
amen. I couldn't agree more. He certainly left a legacy of perseverance that people will always remember his story as someone that overcame a lot of hardship. And then on top of that, he gave us an endless supply of gorgeous music. There are still new box sets and compilations coming out every few years of goodies that we've never heard before. And so people will be listening to his music for as long as there are speakers playing.
Yeah. The amount of hits too. Like when you go back to the early albums and you just look at how many hits they put out year after year after year, it's insane. I mean, they have to have more hits, I would imagine, than most bands, right? Is there like there's got to
I
be a
think they hold
statistic
the
on that?
record for an American band. They have
Yeah.
close to, if not more than 40 top 20 hits.
Yeah, because you would think that the Beatles would be a contender, but then at the same time, the Beatles were only a band until 1970, whereas like the Beach Boys, had all of this output through the 70s and the 80s, and then I mean, even the
Even right
reunion
now,
album.
the Sounds of Summer and Endless Summer are back on the Billboard top
Hmm.
200.
Yeah, yeah, just because of his passing, people are going back and exploring it more. You think?
Partially, but without exception, well, this is crazy too. Uh, excuse me, Sounds of Summer has hardly left Billboard's upper couple 100 spots since it was released in 2003, because every summer people keep buying or streaming that album. Like
That makes sense.
as soon as the weather warms up, the Beach Boys are a brand new band all over again
Yeah,
for people.
it's like
Like,
Little Saint Nick, how that's always their number one song
yeah,
on Spotify when Christmas comes around.
I was just reading an interview with Bruce where he said that, like, sure, eventually they stopped having a lot of current hits in the 90s and 2000s, but that's because they're competing with themselves, because every summer the DJs or the Spotify playlist creators, or, you know, whenever the weather warms up, the Beach Boys music just seeps into all of our lives, you know, and
That's right.
so they're
Do,
always successful in the charts.
I always do love listening to the Beach Boys in the summer. I'll listen to them all year round, but the summer is a great time. Do you have any like go-to Beach Boys summer songs that you like to put on?
Totally. Just to like rattle off the couple that would come to mind, definitely It's Okay, Surfing Safari, Do It Again, 409, probably Dance Dance Dance, Barbara Ann.
Hmm,
Those ones come to mind
nice.
as okay, the weather's warming up. And then of course on the summer night when the sun is setting, you pull out The Warmth of the Sun, you pull out
Perfect.
Kiss Me Baby and
Perfect.
uh The Lonely Sea and songs like that.
Lonely Sea, that's another great one. That to me, that was the first early song where you heard a different side of Brian Wilson because there's a little bit of a darkness to that song that I don't feel like the remainder of the album has. And it just goes into some directions that I don't feel like had been explored up to that point in their discography. At least for me, that was like the first song where I was like, "Oh, okay, he's definitely like going somewhere different than the traditional surfing, car or songs about cars and kind of the typical stuff that their first couple of albums were centered around." I feel like that was the song where he started veering off.
Yeah, their first album, Surfing Safari, it seems like none of the songs dip below 150 BPM. They're all just chugging along,
Yeah.
Dennis pounding away. And then you get to their second album and it starts with a similar affair. And you get to Lonely Sea and you're like, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
is this? Like, and you're just presented that whole other side of the coin. And of
Yeah.
course, following that, you get Surfer Girl and
Insane
Please
album.
Let Me Wonder, and of course, God Only Knows, and the
Yeah.
classic Pet Sounds, which brought you into the fold as far as being a fan. So
Absolutely. And it's funny, after Pet Sounds, yeah, I'd always hear about Smile. And then once I got into Smile, that was an entirely different rabbit hole to go down. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down with this band. Um, for me, the summer music, my couple of my favorites, I love All Summer Long. That's one of my favorite earlier
such a
Beach
great
Boys
one.
tracks. The vocally, like the harmonies on that are insane. I also love Keep an Eye on Summer, which is another more of a deep cut, um, which I think is one of the more underrated songs from that's on Surfer Girl, right? Or
That
is
is
that?
on Shutdown Volume
So I'm
2.
sorry, Shutdown Volume 2. Sorry, Surfer Girl is Your Summer Dream, right?
Hmm.
I love that's another one, super
So
underrated.
pretty.
Great song to teach you what a major seventh chord is too. Speaking of like trying to figure out these chords, on your own when you were exploring their music, that's
That
like
was
the
probably
perfect
the
one to
one
get.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah, or Surfer Girl. It was definitely one of those early ballads.
yeah. Um, and then the Christmas album, I'll say, I think it's the best Christmas album of all time. People might think that that's insane, but I
I don't think it's
honestly,
insane at all. It's
yeah,
tied for my favorite with Phil Spector's. But I
yeah,
think even the Beach
that's a great
Boys
one too.
probably
Yeah.
probably wins, honestly.
Well,
Like
to
Little
me,
Saint Nick, Man with All the
right,
Toys.
every single. It's so hard to write a good original Christmas song, and they did. Is there four? There's
Like
four or five.
five. Yeah.
Yeah, Little Saint Nick, Man with All the Toys, Santa's Beard, um, Merry
Merry
Christmas
Christmas,
Baby.
Baby.
Is
And
there a
then
fifth?
Christmas Day.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, all five of those are incredible Christmas songs. And
All
also,
Christmas standards. Like all
yeah.
songs that I feel like everyone knows.
And to me, like the real unsung hero of Brian Wilson Christmas music is there's a song called Christmassy off of the Brian Wilson Christmas album.
Oh
Like
yeah, I knew you were gonna mention that.
yeah, nobody like even knows about that song. To me, that is like one of the most beautiful and also kind of like it has a melancholy sort of tone to it. There's certain parts that are uplifting, but also some parts that sound kind of sad. And I feel like what he did in that song was really interesting because I feel like Christmas is an interesting time for a lot of people because for some people it's a very exciting, positive, uplifting time, but for a lot of people it could be a very sad time if you're alone, if you don't have a family, if you don't have a significant other. Christmas can be a time that brings up a lot of negative emotions for some people, and I think he juxtaposes those two feelings perfectly in that song. That's one of my favorite Christmas songs, and most people have no idea what it even is, but I've always thought it was interesting that that song kind of gets overlooked because to me, that on that album, the main song is the title track, "What I Really What I Really Want for Christmas," which is also another beautiful original Christmas song. But to me, the unsung hero of that record really is "Christmassy."
Such a well-written song.
Mhm.
It's pretty magical that the same guy who could write endless tunes about summer and the beach and the sun out could write such great Christmas songs as well. It's a
Yeah,
testament to his talent.
yeah, 100%. And it's funny that just to tie this into when we've seen them live, the last time I actually saw him was in 2018. I'm sad that I hadn't seen him more recently, but they performed the Christmas album in 2018. They were doing a little tour of that album, and I saw him in Wallingford, Connecticut at Oakdale Theater, and they did the whole album, and then they, threw in some hits as well. But it was really cool. At that point, Brian's voice had kind of gone. It wasn't the way it was in 2016, and each time I saw him, his voice got progressively worse, which is to be expected at that age. But like I said, I was kind of at a point where I was just happy to be in the same room as him, and he has such an incredible backing band that it's still going to sound great, regardless of how Brian, like what condition Brian was in at that concert. But to be able to hear those songs live was such an awesome experience. Like when I saw they were doing that tour, I was like, I have to see that. And my wife now, when I met her, she had known, the Beach Boys, she appreciated them, and she went to this concert with me. So it was so great to be able to share that experience with her as well and kind of turn her on to some more Brian Wilson stuff.
Yeah, what I love is Brian's music was obviously all about family. You know, not only did he write a lot of songs inspired by the concept of family, but family was such a big part of his story. So I feel like there's no better way to experience his music through, sorry, there's no better way to experience his music than by experiencing it with loved ones, be it your
Yeah.
family or your friends or your significant other. It's just totally makes the music even more magical when you're experiencing it with people that you love because Brian's music was all about that, all about love and mercy. So when you get to experience it in that mutual communal way, it's just one of the best feelings I've ever felt.
Yeah, there's very loving energy at every one of his shows that I've been to. Just everybody in the audience is so nice, and like I said, you just have this general feeling that everybody has so much love and appreciation for Brian, and we're all just so grateful to be in his presence. Um, when was the last time you saw him live?
Last time I saw him live was on his second to last concert, and that was in 2022.
Wow, you saw his second to last concert that he ever put
Yeah,
on? Wow.
yep.
Where was this?
It was with the band Chicago. They did like another Beat Chicago kind of thing with Brian opening and then Chicago following. And it was in the greater Chicago area, let's call it. I don't remember
Mm.
what exact town it was in, but it was in the Chicago area.
Was that driving distance from you?
Yeah, yeah, it was an
Oh, okay.
hour and a half, give or take.
Oh, not bad, not bad. That's pretty incredible that you caught his second to last concert. How did he
Yeah.
sound?
By that point in the tour, he kind of, for the most part, stopped singing. He would sing maybe
Right.
like a couple lines of a song, and then uh, either the music would kind of go instrumental for a little bit, or someone else would sort of take over for
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
And so, that was sort of the turning point where I think even a lot of his band members were like, okay, something's up. Like, because
Hmm.
Brian, throughout his solo career, he wouldn't always sing perfectly in key, or sometimes his words were a little slurred, but he was always singing. And on this last tour, he would kind of just go silent for big portions of the show. But with that said, it was still magical, and there were still moments when he was singing that he still had that pure, gorgeous Brian Wilson vocal tone that he never ever lost. So I'm not even trying to diminish what singing he did do on that last night. It was just few and far between as far as his vocal
Yeah.
contributions.
Yeah, of course. And I get that. And it can be hard to see him in that state. I mean, even the last time I saw him, actually, maybe every time I saw him, now that I think about it, but he was never able to like walk out on the stage by himself. Like he had to have a guy, holding onto his arm, kind of guiding him to the piano bench. And it's obvious that his health was deteriorating at a certain point, and that just comes with age. That's natural. Um,
Every time I saw him, I always thought like, oh, I can't wait till next time. But at that 2022 show, it was pretty clear like, oh, okay, I don't think there will be a next time.
yeah,
But in a
yeah,
way that made it even more special, because it just really reminded, I think, everyone in the audience to be in the moment and really just to soak up
yeah.
his genius, and his spirit.
And just the fact that, we were both lucky enough to see him as many times as we did in his lifetime. There's nothing worse than a musician passing away and then you say to yourself, like, oh, I wish I saw them live. I'm so grateful that I don't have that regret and that I discovered him when I did. I mean, life is so random. I could have just happened to, discover the Beach Boys in 2022, and then go down the rabbit hole then. But I happened to get into them, I feel like, at the right time. And I remember years ago when we did the episode with you, me, and Scott, where we went over the chords of some of the different Beach Boys songs. I remember Scott said something along the lines, because this was in 2020, I believe, and Scott was saying, he's like, it's a great time to be a fan of the Beach Boys. And I never really thought about that, but then in hindsight, I'm like, he was so right. I mean, I feel like the mid 2010s was like this magical time where I feel like the Beach Boys kind of found this resurgence through a lot of different things, between the Love and Mercy movie coming out, Brian doing his autobiography, and then the Long Promised Road coming out in 2021. I feel like there were just like a lot of things that kind of kept the Beach Boys in the zeitgeist.
Yeah,
And I'm just, yeah,
even to today, it's incredible with the Disney Plus documentary
right, right.
and the coffee table big giant 13-pound book that they had come out recently. And yeah, it's really just release after release or event after event of this true, like you said, resurgence of the group in the zeitgeist.
Hmm. Yeah. And now that he's passed on, I'm trying to, because I have all these friends that are asking me now more about the Beach Boys, and I'm sure the same thing with you. Like a lot of people knew how much I loved the Beach Boys. So the day that he passed away, I got like, 15 or 20 texts from random friends like apologizing to me as if like I lost a family member or something like that. And I'm sure the same thing happened with you.
Right. And I'm sure it happened with like thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, possibly. Like his music
Yeah.
touched so many lives that I bet there were so many people, and obviously including both of us, getting those messages and those well wishes on that day.
Yeah.
So it's really touching.
Yeah, and it was a lot. I mean, it was kind of overwhelming to even just process it and take it in. I mean, we all knew in the back of our mind that he was going to go at some point, but you're never prepared to hear it. And I always kind of wondered. I was like, I wonder like where I'm gonna. Yeah, I don't know if you ever think about stuff like that. Sometimes I'll have like kind of these messed up thoughts where I'm like, well, when this person passes, like I wonder how I'm gonna react to it, or I wonder like where I'm gonna be. And like when it happened, it was just kind of surreal. Like I was about to go into a lesson, into a house to give a lesson, and I get a text from my friend, and he's like, so sad to hear what happened to Brian. And he just said Brian, and I actually thought he was talking about another Brian that we mutually talk about. And I was like, wait, Brian. And I looked him up, and this a different Brian. But I was like, and nothing happened. I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And then he sent me an article. It's like Brian Wilson passed away. I was like, holy shit! Did not see that coming.
Yeah, I likewise, that's something that I definitely anticipated for. I mean, truthfully, I began anticipating it when I was still a child, and it's something that I anticipated all the way from adolescence to adulthood. And when the moment finally came, like you said, it was surreal and it was emotional and made me a little sad, but at the same time, it gave me great relief, and it gave me almost a sense of comfort knowing that he was with his brothers again and with his parents again.
Right.
So,
Well, when you have a life that is stricken with so much struggle and tragedy and just a lot of dark stuff, and when you know somebody suffers a lot, I do think there is some feeling of relief that comes with, hopefully, them not suffering anymore, and their pain is
Yeah.
gone, and they're at peace. And the thought of Brian being at peace is something that gives me a lot of joy. I Because ultimately I want that more than anything else, and I think that's what most Beach Boys fans want. I think at the core of all of this love and all of these great feelings that we have towards Brian Wilson, at the center of that is just this longing for him to be at peace and for him to feel okay and to not be struggling. And I really hope that's the case. Like I said, we don't know what happens on the other side, but I hope he's at peace right now, and I hope he's with his brothers, and he's left quite the legacy behind that I don't think will ever be surpassed by any other pop artist.
Amen. And I guess to bring it all home and bring it all for full circle, I'd say that when Brian was a kid, he said that he either wanted to be a baseball player or a psychologist. And while he didn't technically pursue either of those career paths, he filled stadiums like a baseball player, and he helped countless people with their lives like a psychologist. So he ultimately fulfilled his goals and made the world a better place for it.
That's beautiful. Completely agree. Made the world a much better place, and my life is infinitely better for being exposed to the Beach Boys music and the amount of comfort that their music has given me in tough times, and the amount of peace that can be achieved just through, getting lost in their music, and just the magical qualities of Brian's songwriting that I think is very unlike any other pop artist. I think he is a truly unique and gifted songwriter, and these songs are gonna live on forever for generations. And I think 50 years down the road, people are still going to be debating, what key God only knows is in, or discussing different chord movements. And there's just going to be an endless supply of stuff that we can forever explore. And yeah, very grateful to have shared this earth with Brian Wilson, just being able to live at the same time as him. It's pretty we're very fortunate.
Amen. Whenever I meet someone and they say that they got to see Elvis Presley or someone, Michael Jackson, I'm so jealous and wonder
Yeah,
what that was like and think of it as a true privilege. And, someday we'll get to tell our kids that we saw the Brian Wilson.
yeah,
So it's such an honor to have been able to see him and have his music change our lives and create our friendship and
yeah,
many others. So it's been a lovely experience, for all of us.
yeah. Really has been.
And RIP to an amazing musician and an inspiring human being all around.
Yeah, love and mercy to Brian and his
Love and
family, and
mercy.
to everybody
Amen.
in the Beach Boys orbit. Well, it's been so great catching up with you again. Hopefully, we'll do this without a 3 year gap in between next
I
time.
was gonna say, like, I feel such a renewed sense of inspiration to do what we can to keep his music out there and alive.
Yeah,
So if anyone watching this wants to comment and suggest things for Mike and I to revisit or talk about some
yeah,
more, I think I can say confidently we'd both be thrilled to do so.
yeah. I think we have plenty of stuff we can talk about. It's funny, even doing this episode, going into it, we had both been saying how, what are we going to talk about? Because it's a little different now that somebody passes away and we're doing a tribute. And I was worried that we weren't going to have enough stuff to talk about. But you and me, once we start going, it's fine. It's like an
Yeah.
hour and a half flies by. I don't even know how long it's been. It might have even been 2 hours. But yeah, it would definitely because initially when we stopped doing the podcast, I think it was mostly just because we got to a point where we kind of ran out of ideas to talk about. I mean, we had 16 or 17 episodes, and we had general topics that we would cover, and then you kind of get to a point where it's like, all right, what do we talk about next? And it seemed like we had to do a little tribute episode to Brian because it's only fair. And plus, I feel like I have a responsibility to some of my YouTube subscribers because looking back on it, my YouTube channel has changed a lot over the years and the trajectory of it has evolved. But initially, when I go back to the early days of my YouTube channel, like the first year was like almost exclusively a Beach Boys channel. Like it was basically like those guitar covers that we were talking about with a couple of other things here and there, but most of the stuff I
Yeah,
did was Beach Boys. Um, so I figured, we had to do a little reunion episode and pay proper tribute to Brian. Um, Before we wrap
agreed.
it up, is anything going on with you that you want to share with the audience, or any releases or anything you want us to include links
Yeah,
for or anything?
there's uh quite a few projects I'm working on that are in the pipeline at various stages of completion, some of which I'm at liberty to talk about, some of which I still have to keep under wraps. But I can say that a lot of things happening within the orbit of the Beach Boys world or people that work with them. But what I can say is I have a duo with Mike Love's son, Christian, and we started working together a couple of years ago, and we uh, write songs together and we record them as a duo where we each play the instruments, and Christian sings with his great Beach Boy voice and with those perfect harmonies. So it's been a really magical collaboration and experience to work with him. And we released our first EP together in May of 2024. And our next project will be coming out sometime this summer. So I can't wait for everyone to hear it. And it's amazing to keep Brian's legacy alive and keep that spirit alive through working with a family member of his. It's been a real honor.
Yeah, that's really deep. That's so incredible. I'm really happy for you. Would you be willing to share how you ended up hooking up with Christian Love?
Yeah, so it was just one of those things where he released a solo album in a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was must have been 2023. And I loved what he was doing with his solo music, and we connected on social media, and he loved what I was doing with my music, and we just thought, hey, wouldn't this be a great fit for us to make music together? And at first, we didn't know whether it was going to be a duo or whether it was going to be one song or multiple songs, but we just sort of hit the ground running. And once the first song came out, the rest just started pouring out. So for the most part, our workflow has been uh, that we work on the tracks virtually as far as writing and constructing the instrumental backing tracks. And then we get together, usually in California, and record the vocals together. So it has that, in-person harmony sound to it. And, we'll each sing harmonies, and we've recruited different members of the Beach Boys background band to lend their talents to different songs. So yeah, it's been a really cool
That's
experience, and
incredible. That's a dream come true for you. That's so incredible.
absolutely. And Christian's just a wonderful human being. He's a really uh, warm and kind guy, and really funny, and he's got a ton of interest too in things like volleyball. And so I just really recommend not only checking out the music that Christian and I released as a duo, but he has some great music just as a solo artist as well. And of course, you can catch Christian on the road with the Beach Boys. For anyone listening who doesn't know this, Christian has been a part of the Beach Boys live band for going on 20 years now.
Wow.
So really, really talented guy.
How old is he?
He's uh he's in his 50s,
Yeah, it's funny.
but
I forget how old the Beach Boys guys are because anytime somebody says somebody's son, I assume it's going to be like this young guy. Like I said with Matt Jardine.
yeah, Christian's on the cover of Sunflower as a baby, basically,
Wow, that's so cool.
when they had all the kids on the album
Yeah,
cover.
yeah.
So yeah,
Wow.
that's been a real honor to work with Christian. I've also had the pleasure of working with Larry DeVoskin, which should be a familiar name to people who are into Al Jardine's music. Larry has worked on a lot of great music with Al Jardine, from Waves of Love to a song called Wish and several others. So Larry and I have been cooking up a few different things that I'm sure people will hear in due time. And yeah, a few other projects that are in the pipeline that I'm sure I'll tell you about and tell our listeners about when the time comes.
Yeah, it'll give us an excuse to do another episode. So I look
There we
forward to
go.
it. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that concludes it. Thank you so much to everybody that listened. And I appreciate all the comments asking us to do a reunion episode. That was definitely part of what gave me the motivation to reach out to Nate and get this going. And I'm really glad we did because, like I said, it's only fitting to do a tribute to Brian Wilson because he's both of one of our favorite songwriters of all time, and he deserved a proper send off, especially for my channel, which is we was very heavily focused on the Beach Boys at a certain point, and will forever be one of my favorite bands. And that's never going to change. So rest in peace, Brian Wilson. Love and mercy to his family, and Nate. Always so great seeing you. And we will definitely do this again soon. I'm glad everything's going well with you, and best of luck with all of your future musical endeavors. And I look forward to doing this again really soon.
Right back at you, man.
All right,
Well,
buddy.
yeah, have a good one, man. Love you.
Yeah, love you too. All right, I'll see you soon.